All right. So, welcome, guys. So we came up with a list of topics yesterday based on some things that we're seeing that might be interesting. The first topic we were going to get into actually was launched back in February by this guy named Andrej Karpathy. He's a Tesla OpenAI guy who coined the term vibe coding. And by the way, he has these awesome series of videos on YouTube if you haven't seen them. They're fantastic. And it's just sort of this idea you can sit down and code, wherever the vibe takes you, right? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And like, what are the limits of that? How does that maybe fit into the enterprise, that kind of thing. Then we're going to shift into AI in the enterprise. Specifically, where we see large companies struggling, because they are definitely struggling. And maybe offer some ideas about how do we break through that. And then, where are they now? Where are they going? And then the last topic I had was just GPT-5 was launched a little bit, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and now we've had a little bit of time to digest that, experience that. We'll talk a little bit about that and our impressions and tips for getting the most from that. All right, so shifting into vibe coding, I thought, can I share? Let's see. I'd like to share a screen. Cool. You might have to edit this part out.
I'm impressed.
You like my
This is the real test. Can we do screen sharing?
Can you guys see that? All right, so I was like, I gotta find the famous tweet, right? So this is the famous tweet where Andrej Karpathy sort of coins this term vibe coding, where you give into the vibes and sort of forget that the code exists and so on. So I won't read sort of the whole thing, but to me this has sort of become a big thing. And so I thought it'd be interesting to just sort of talk about, does this a hobby thing? Does this make its way into the enterprise? Is it already there in some way? Maybe what does this even mean for developers and and development teams in the enterprise, and so on. So anyway, so I'll sort of open it up, and I think Stu, you may be the king of vibe coding, I would guess. Maybe
I love it.
So let's start with you. What do you
Mostly because Stu has little else to do on the weekend, but okay.
That's right.
Clearly.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I love it. I was doing it right before this call. I think it's,
what is it? Like, how do you think?
What is it?
How would how would you describe it? Obviously, we saw his version of it, but how would you just sort of describe it?
I think it's can mean different things, and I think when we get to the limits of vibe coding, that's when I think there's probably a distinction a little bit between AI assisted coding and all the way into vibe coding, right? So vibe coding is a subset of AI assisted coding, the way I look at it. So I think what you have is when you're vibe coding, you're really relying on the AI agent to do most or all of the coding the actual coding for you. And what you're doing is you're kind of like the pair programming, pair programmer working with your agent to do this, or the manager of the agent, if you want to think of it that way. You're you're having a conversation with the agent, and it's doing the coding, and you're just you're going back and forth. You get in the flow, and I love it for someone like me, who has spent most of my career working with technical people and being that manager of technical people, but not having the opportunity that often to actually get in and code. My coding skills had gotten rusty, but I understand the concepts pretty well. So to be able to just talk to in English, go back and forth with one of these agents and produce real meaningful work is awesome. And as Jim says, that's what I do all weekend, because it's just too fun to do anything else. Right? It's like my hobby.
Like what's your setup? Like when you say this, are you just like, I'm just typing stuff into ChatGPT, or no, I have sort of Claude code connected to, like, what is your setup?
So like now we're going to get into Pepsi versus Coke discussions, and everyone has different preferred setups or whatever.
Well, you're in Atlanta, so Coke is the answer.
So I actually, I'm really deep into this, so I use, a combination of tools. So, but I think probably at the moment, the two tools that at least get the most publicity out there for vibe coding are there's one called Cursor, which is we can talk about in a second, and the other one that's getting a lot of attention right now is Claude Code. So Cursor is if you do much coding, one of the popular kind of editors where you actually go in and do the coding as a programmer is called VS Code. And so a Visual Studio Code is where the VS comes from. And Cursor is basically a fork from that. So it was built off of that base, but it's got special functionality in it that allows, that makes it really good to work
So
with,
you download that.
AI agents. You download that. And so you're in there, you're looking at the code that it's creating. You can make edits yourselves to files as you needed. You're talking to the agent as you go. The agent has tools it can access to do its work. So, if you just ask ChatGPT, write some code for me, one, you got to pick that up and put the code in somewhere where it can run. And then two, you've got to two, you're a little limited, but this can update, source code control for me. It can go search the internet for me. It can, you send me a Slack message, if you set it up right, it can do all that sort of stuff. And then,
so you've got Cursor talking to what?
Yeah, so my setup right now, if we want to really dork out, is my setup right now. So Claude Code is the other one.
Yeah.
Claude Code can also work inside of VS Code as well. So and it can work inside a Cursor, or you can literally just run it from your terminal, right? Like but my setup right now is I use a little combo of both, depending on what I want to do. If I'm using Cursor at the moment, I'm preferring GPT-5 most of the time.
Interesting.
And then I will. And usually, what I do is try to follow the same process you would coding. So in other words, so the first thing I do is I don't ask it unless it's something simple. I don't say, "Hey, can you just code this for me?" I say, let's write a spec on how to do this, right? And we agree on the spec for it, and then I tell it to implement the spec, and we go through like that. Yeah.
What app have you built that's kind of like a cool app that you built, vibe coding, that you're excited about?
Oh, now we're working, in with Answer Rocket, where we're able to build these. We're able to build analytical agents, inside. So, connect to data and do all sorts of cool things. And when you get to the advanced stages, if you want, you can do that. You can write Python to do that and stuff like that. So I've been building a lot with that. I built, I built a little college football stats website. All sorts of crazy, personal things.
Did you come into the day intending on building a college football website, or did that just come to you as you were vibing along?
I didn't do that
That's
today.
the thing I want to do.
I didn't do that today, but yeah, there was a day when I woke up and decided to do that. Yeah.
So Jimmy, you vibe coding anything?
Well, let me say it. Let me sort of take a little bit different take here, and that my question maybe implied the direction there. So ultimately, we're in the middle of this giant hype cycle of AI, and I'm a subscriber to it and a participator in it and a contributor to it, and I believe in enormous parts of it. But sort of when we get out to the edges, in things like vibe coding, hey, I can stand up a quick app. Yes. But then there gets to be this question of eventually, hey, are we going to sort of get to the return? Can we create something that is production-like and useful and actually contribute to the enterprise or the clients we serve? Do we understand the code that was just created? Is sort of what's the risk that we introduce around it? So awesome, create a personal app, create something for yourself or something for a group, something that's low risk. But somewhere in there becomes sort of some risk that this gets taken a little too far. And I'm curious sort of where you guys are, what you all think about that.
Yeah, I was watching some podcast on A16Z, and one of the partners on there was talking about how they built this app to allow people to take a selfie with Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO. And she goes, yeah. She goes, but fortunately, I had somebody DM me that I actually had embedded my OpenAI key in the code. It was like basically visible.
Right.
She's like, yeah, that's probably not cool. To your point, Jim, of so this gets really interesting to go, vibe coding. So my little, and it's been for me a little bit of a hobby as well to sort of mess around. And I'm trying to build some iPhone apps, and which is built in Swift code, and you have to, so I'm using Claude Code to do that. And the thing is, I've got an app that works. And if you sat me down and said, hey, write a Hello World app in Swift, I would literally have no clue how to do it.
Right.
But I have an app that's written in that works. It is, I am finding, Stu, like you said, you have to sort of apply actual design principles. You got to design, and you have to do a security review and a code review. And I did this one thing where I said, hey, review the code. And it was basically like, yeah, this is a total piece of garbage, monolithic, code, which it had written, of course. And I said, great, can you sort of clean it up? And I actually will use OpenAI and Claude sort of against each other.
I do the same.
Adversarially, correct this thing. And so it said, yeah, sure, I'll rewrite the whole thing. And I thought, this is never going to work again. And it actually, for one shot at it, and then I asked OpenAI, how did the code look now? I was like, oh, it's great. Like, okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
And Mike, when I know you're probably deeper into just using LLMs and AI. Where does this go for you, and like how does it like start to impact professional coders, and how do you see all that sort of going?
Oh, that's a great question. Look, I've got two kids that are they're grown now, but they're not technical, and so when Lovable came out as like the fastest growing revenue curve of all time, that's one of these vibe coding platforms.
Crazy.
Where you have to go ask to see the code, right? Otherwise, it's going to do something.
Right.
When that came out, I did the $20 subscription, and my son was shopping for a house. We built a website in about 20 minutes that wherever you are, it shows you the prices of the houses around you with a clickable link to the Google Street View for that house, right? And and stood it up on a URL and turned it on, right? And I'm not going to share the URL because my Google key is in that. My
security,
but at least you know better.
Exactly. But so it was just fascinating to me that I did have to before it actually all worked. I had to paste in a little JSON that I might have spent some pixie dust on, some human cells trying to make it work. But it did in about 20 minutes. It stood up a working website that included integration to third-party APIs and was registered at the right domain service and whatever, right? It was all right there. So it looked good. I mean, all kinds of things had happened in that 20 minutes. So so where do I see it is a good question. Look, I like Stu. I have multiple tools working all the time, right? I do use Cursor, but my work in Cursor, it's sort of like a backseat driver, right? As I'm typing, it's suggesting what's next, and a lot of times I'm rage spamming the escape key. Like, no, I don't want that suggestion. No. But I have noticed that if I turn it off, I miss it, right? So I don't want to turn it off. But it's like a backseat driver. It's somebody giving me, hey, watch out for that intersection. Oh, did you know that, right? And so it's really good in that regard. And I think there it makes everybody more productive, right? So I can't see somebody being serious about a development job where they wouldn't have that kind of supervisor. Yeah. But then at the same time, I've also got in another window to the point where I have to have it alert me when it's done. I've got another window running background jobs, right? Where I want it to, rebuild a user interface, or I want it to, I've got one example of how to do something and I want 5, right? Like, this is a good example. I did a little personal finance simulator. Basically, it's an object and you tick it and it just updates finances. And so you might have a subclass that's for a job because you get money in and you get taxes out. Oh, so you better have a taxes object, right? And then you have a checking object and a mortgage object, right? So you have all these little objects and you tick them and you can watch your finances change over time. Well, it was great because I literally just said, all right, here's an example of how I want it to work. It's got credits and debits. Everything goes from one account to another account. This is what this one's tracking. And then I said, my wife wants to retire in 3 years. My son's done in college in 1 year. The house will be paid off X. And it just ripped out this list of these things and built the forecast out, right?
Cool.
So it is pretty cool. Where it fails, though, and this I've seen it go off the rails miserably, which is another reason why professional developers are in no danger. Is when is the AI slop problem, right? AI slop is when it just starts creating bulky code that does nothing, and that's very real.
Yeah.
It's very real, and there's a huge cost of that.
Yeah.
And you are you are many things for sure, but one of those things is a senior professional grade developer, if you will, besides being CTO and a whole bunch of things. Yeah. And many people in the vibe coding arena are not that. And that recognition of the slop is sort of a different thing. That said, it sounds like you're well on your way to sort of monetizing your apps. You sort of get out of this career path, and you're off there selling personal finance apps and real estate shopping apps.
I will say just a couple more things. You're absolutely right. Look, there are insidious kind of problems in coding where you spend half an hour trying to get it to not do something, right? Yeah. And the model is really good at helping you find those. It's like you have to point the flashlight. You have to be in the right place, and sometimes I know in these 10 lines of the code there's a problem. I don't know what it is, so I'll just open a comment. I'll tell it start a comment, and it'll fill in. Oh, but this doesn't deal with the case where it's an edge case. It's midnight on a leap year, and this kind of thing. It's absolutely brilliant for those cases. I love it for any kind of bulky work. Like, all right, I just did a bunch of work. Comment that, right? Explain why it's doing what it's doing.
The way you're describing it to me, sort of, if we sort of, rather than describing this as pair programming and vibe coding, it's a spectrum, and sort of how you use it. And where you lie on that spectrum is very much sort of associated with where you are in terms of your capabilities and what you're trying to do. And the way you're using it feels a little bit more to me like some of the pair programming type model than maybe just the pure, hey, I'm wandering around my keyboard coming up with ideas and vibe coding it. But the way you're describing it to me sounds like it's sort of super beneficial, scalable, up into the enterprise level in a way that is the 3x, 5x, 10x to productivity.
Especially considering we're only at the beginning of models that were trained to code, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these things learned programming languages because they learned language. Like, imagine if we especially trained it, compared to the number of training examples it has for Chinese or English, the number of programming examples it has is tiny, right? So it's only going to get better, I guess, is where I'm going. Even with today's technology, these coding models could get much, much better than they are, and they will.
Yeah.
I think
just wonder if it's, go ahead, Steve. Go on.
I was just going to say, I think to Jim's point, because I think he's raising good questions about where is this valuable in the enterprise versus just doing a personal project or things like that.
Right.
One, there is a lot of value to professional developers. There's a lot of value, which might describe when you look at where does it make sense to vibe code in the enterprise as less of a full technical developer. I still think it can be pretty revolutionary, but it's not by shipping your product necessarily right away to 100 million people, that's with an enterprise. That's a really complex, big enterprise code base. But I think where it's really valuable in those cases, one of the challenges when you're building big enterprise apps is defining what you want, right? And normally there's a discipline called product managers for that, right? That are really they're writing hey, here's the way I want the UI, or UX designers, here's the way I want the UI to work. Here's the way I'd like to do this. Those folks who normally then hand off that to a developer to implement, they can now do rapid prototyping.
They can iterate like crazy on this, 100%.
So you can iterate super quickly on that, and close the gap in terms of accurately
That's a good point.
describing to the person who's going to implement it what you have in your head, because that's usually, it's very often difficult to
Yep.
communicate what you have in your head to someone else. So you can kind of quickly put together those type of prototypes. You can run pipelines where, look, every time a professional developer does check it in, there's a certain amount of
Yeah.
agentic work that's done on top of that to make sure the level of commenting is right, to do a code review, to do certain things like
Security
that.
audit.
Security audits, great example. So there's an enormous number
Cool.
of ways this is making enterprise
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I
engineering
think the
faster.
product managers really end up being
That's
really
right.
big winners here. All right, so let's move on. I've got another top. The next topic was around just sort of where we see enterprises struggle. Let me sort of share. Let me see if I can share this with you guys. I just pulled a couple of, I just clipped these today, and these are all within the last couple of months. Tech Radar talking about, despite the hype, most AI projects are stuck in the sandbox. In the bottom right one, AI tools are a game changer, but these reliability issues are a problem. Very few know how to keep it. I thought it was funny, keep it from falling over. BCG is at the bottom of this quote, so talks about, overall AI maturity hasn't moved beyond the experimental stage. This was an article in like April. This another one from Wall Street Journal. Companies are struggling. So, you guys are talking to large companies all the time. Do you agree? And then if so, like, where are they getting sort of hung up? Jim, maybe kick this one off for us.
The title of those articles, or the tagline in those articles, to me exactly tie into or at least sort of reflect some of the issue. And it's not an AI project. There's a business problem or a business opportunity. That's where it needs to start. And if you're starting with something saying this is an AI project, you high potential that you're starting. Yeah, you've got a hammer in your hand and you're looking around for a nail. And we see large enterprises that are literally doing dozens and dozens of proofs of concept and experiments. And it's bluntly, we've spoken with many clients where when we come in and start a conversation around the business process, the business problem, and by the way, it doesn't always have to be a business problem. It may be something that's operating fine today, but it's still a business opportunity because of what AI can enable. So you don't want to just sort of say, oh, where are your business problems? But it's got to start there. And then it's, hey, we've got this awesome new thing that we never had before, that we can apply and do things that we never could do before. And let's look at it through that lens. And again, sort of the taglines of those, this is an AI project. No, this is hey, let's go out and grow our revenue in this space, or we need to drive efficiency in our supply chain, or we need to, sort of give ourselves a way to look at the market and gain new insights in the market and where we want to apply our marketing muscle. It starts with those kind of conversations and how can we apply AI to it. And I think that's the vibe, if you will. Go back to the vibe coding. We need to sort of get the conversation inverted.
I would throw a few things out there in addition to that. I agree with all of that. One I see, and it sort of varies from company to company. One scenario I see a lot, whereas companies are like, yeah, we've got to do some stuff with AI. And then you sort of ask them questions like, oh, okay, so, where are you guys getting started? What are the ground rules? What tools are you using? And so on. They're sort of all just sort of stare at each other, and like, well, we're really not supposed to put stuff in ChatGPT. And, you tell them, well, have you turned off the personal data collection? And they all open up their app on their phone. And they quickly go and sort of like, okay, we're starting at the beginning background.
Here.
Yeah. Like, oh gosh, okay, cool. Or you sort of see a little bit of that, or you see what I call sort of the AI prevention department. And any project that comes in and we see a lot of IT organizations are the AI prevention department where they don't want another tool. They don't want to be the ones that get in trouble for, their code leaking out into some large language model and so on. And they just sort of lock stuff down. And there's sort of just a great deal of fear, I think, without sort of understanding sort of the opportunity. So those are some of the big things I see.
I
besides
think the key thing I see with that too, Pete, on the AI prevention thing there's some good concerns backing that up,
Sure,
you know, by
sure,
the AIs. You know, they're right to have some concerns, but it's one of those areas where trying to shut it down is the least secure option, you know, because
right.
what
Because
happened,
everybody's going to
like,
do exactly.
because the second it as these tools are so valuable right now, the second you don't have a corporate endorsed approach for how to use these tools,
That's right.
everyone's just going to use their own
Hmm.
personal chat GBT to do it, and then
Yep.
that is literally the worst way to
Yeah.
do it,
Right.
right?
Become
And
problem. Yeah.
so, you know,
Yeah.
and so you feel like, oh well, I'm being conservative or taking this approach. That's the low risk way. I actually argue that's the highest
Right.
risk thing
I
almost
agree.
to do. It's much
Yep.
better to recognize that these tools just have way too much value to keep out of people's hands, and to
Yep.
have, you know, the right, you know, have a the right way to do it, that, you know, and there's all sorts of ways
And to
out there
promote
now.
that this
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
how
and
we
to
want to
promote
do
it.
it here,
That's
Sure.
as
right.
opposed
Well,
to just sort of trying to hold it all at bay,
and
sort of thing.
the stuff is so exciting, right? I mean, that it gets everybody's juices flowing, and everybody wants to bring their thing to the table.
Hmm.
And like, you know, for the whole RAG pattern, right? The retrieval generation
Yeah.
pattern for searching dark data, that came about because of a demo that OpenAI did that was showing you how you could take a model that was trained before something happened and teach it about that thing so it could answer questions. It was the Olympics, the Winter
Hmm.
Olympics in 23, I think it was. So what was really interesting there is that pattern, everybody saw that and said, oh my God, I can light up all of my enterprise data using that
Right.
pattern, right? And then they stayed in that pattern for a year and a half and tried to use it for everything, like searching databases and examining analytics, and it really went sideways. And that same thing is kind of happening with vibe coding now. Everybody's looking at it saying, oh,
Mm.
I don't need to buy a platform. I don't need to build some special thing. I can just vibe code this and turn it on over the weekend, and I'll have my own version of it. It's just prompts, right? It's just prompts, that, as they say.
Hmm. Right.
And so this it sort of gets it gets enterprises into trouble because you end up being able to show something really quickly, but it's like
Yep.
trying to go to the moon by going up a mountain. Right, you'll get
Right.
closer. You get closer every step
Yeah.
you take. Right, but then eventually you're going to realize you need a rocket. And so the kind of things that I run into all the time, working with customers, is they basically are looking at the block diagrams and saying, well, there's a database, I've got that. There's an enterprise chat window, I can do that. That's my portal. There's an LLM, I can just use one of those that I've found over here. I'll just wire all that
Right.
up, and here we go. Right.
Exactly. And I'll be
And
done.
and I'll be done.
AI done.
Exactly right. And and the problem is, I like to explain, the complexity is in the lines between those things, right? Every the language model needs things done in a very special way and tracked and audited because it can make mistakes, and the human needs things that are reliable and true, and they're very trusting because it's an IT platform, right? The database definitely needs things done a very special way, and it is prone to error, right? So the vibe coding works to get you to that kind of, not even a 1.0 demo, to a 0.1
Yeah.
demo, right? And then everybody can do that over the weekend, and it really looks like it's
Right.
something that you just
Yeah.
ought to be able to pound out in a couple of weeks, and then it ends up taking a lot more, which is kind of why some of these
Yeah.
troubles come up.
We do see. I think one of the things is people have really latched on to the RAG approach as sort of a
Mhm.
look. IT organizations, they're really struggling with how do I manage all this infrastructure? How to do it safely? How do I not? They have all these challenges, and so when they see a thing that works that's as magical as RAG, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, here's the thing. Boom, I've added AI everywhere, and I'm good, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we're seeing that a lot, right? That to hammer everything's a nail, and they don't go. And what we're finding is to really drive a lot of value, you got to go deep into these use cases to do
Mhm.
the things you're talking about, Mike, right? To provide all the right context in all the right places to do things and use the tool in a way that adds value in your domain for your company, that reflects your strategy. It's work to do that. It's not just
Right.
sort of add sort of this layer on top. I think
Well,
we see that in
and
a lot of places.
the reason it's got so much attention is because it takes unstructured and makes it structured. And so so you put in Coke and you put in Pepsi, and you're going to get out a fixed thing, a thing that you can then put in a database that you can track, right? The problem is Coke and Pepsi are almost identical in there, even though in the real world we know that they're very different things, very different.
Quite different.
They're almost identical because they're brands of dark colas, right? And you know, what were my sales in Brazil last year is almost exactly the same thing as what are my revenues going to be in Mexico next year. It's literally almost exactly the same thing in the RAG world. But the IT affinity for it comes from the fact that it takes either one of those questions and makes it look the same, ready to go in a database, ready to go in a search, right? So it takes me out of the business of worrying about that messy text, and all of a sudden it's numbers, and I'm comfortable. And
it's super useful depending on the scenario, right?
Absolutely.
It's just not the tool for everything, right?
Right.
Jim,
exactly
what
right.
you look like you were going to add?
Well, there were sort of two adds. First of all, back to your AI prevention department. You know, certainly IT can play a role in that, and the hype. IT is maybe least immune to the hype because they may view it as a threat to a domain they've owned. We're sort of creating a new server in a closet here with AI that is way more than the old server in a closet that IT was worried about. So that's one thing, sort of getting control of it. But they're also not immune to the hype cycle from a standpoint of interest. They're super interested in developing personal skills. They see it even in some cases as a threat to jobs and careers. So they want to lean into it heavily and sort of get control of it. There's certainly other issues related to compliance in certain organizations where this is sort of a meaningful, talking about how the AI is going to be used, super meaningful. Legal concerns over, protecting corporate the company's IP and the company's data, all of that I don't want to diminish. One other sort of interesting thing where we talk about enterprises struggling, and I'm going to maybe draw a distinguishing line between large cap companies or clients of ours and mid caps. We do run into a lot of companies there that are actually just beginning this journey. And depending on sort of how they're thinking about it or their maturity, it's sort of a question of just, well, how do I roll out AI? Like they're rolling out another Microsoft Office. And
exactly.
You got to sort of totally flip the script on that discussion. This isn't just sort of roll out AI. This is an opportunity to think about the way we do business. Now, the beauty of that, the mid-cap client or the smaller client in that case, the opportunity for them to become AI first at speed throughout the enterprise and do that in a meaningful way. I think this presents a channel or an opportunity for them to maybe leapfrog some of their larger competition in a way that's almost never existed before. So that's a great discussion to have.
And we've talked a little bit about why do we think they're struggling? Probably haven't talked enough about okay, so what do I do about it, Jim? Let's maybe go around the horn, Jim. What's your quick advice of here's how you get back on track?
Well, it depends on it depends on sort of the company and where you're off track, bluntly. I think one of the first things I would say is really sort of a little bit of self-discovery here and honesty as to whether or not you have all the skills you need in-house. And there's sort of three answers to that. Yes, I do, and I'm confident of that. Okay. No, I don't, and I'm confident of that. Well, then let's go figure out how you're going to get those skills. Or I'm unsure if I do. And bluntly, if you're unsure if you do, you're probably in the no, you don't camp. So let's think about, how you're going to attack it. And then sort of, okay, you're there, but let's think about sort of what are the topics that we want to address. I think some of the big topics you want to think through are, okay, how are we going to enable, Stu talked about this, how are we going to enable our workforce in a controlled way at an individual productivity level? And people can make huge strides in their individual productivity without sort of having to get agreement or process alignment or whatever, just doing what they're doing today. That's the thing. Okay, separately, how do we want to think about this, not in terms of individual productivity, but in terms of the enterprise and what we do and let's think through the use cases. Where can we get value out of this, and also where can we how do we get there quickly? What's the viability? What's the reasonableness of this? AI is not going to do everything for you, but there is a scenario here where you can do things with your business that creates a flywheel, where a use case creates some value. When I say value, I mean real value, a material dollar value, and funds the next one and the next one. So I think there's sort of some different categories to think through of how you want to apply AI.
Yeah, I would probably pile on to a lot of what you said. One, I'd say if you don't have a proactive strategy to be advocating for AI inside of the company and pushing sort of an AI first strategy, you probably have an AI prevention department, right? So first sort of get proactive in terms of bringing it into the enterprise and give people like, all right, here's how we do it, right? And you can do it the right way to Stu's point, because otherwise you're going to probably end up in the worst possible scenario. And then stop thinking about it as this thing you sort of apply, AI spreading peanut butter, AI everywhere is sort of going to achieve some goal. It's very much very use case specific, I think, and you got to sort of think about it in those ways. Okay.
And I think
go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, I mean, to a certain way, you have to think about the raw AI, right? So when we just talk about a particular model like GPT-5 or Claude 4.1 or whatever, you really have to think of it as like this really, really smart, college student, could be even PhD level, like college student, but, who has a really bad long-term memory, or really bad short-term memory,
long-term memory,
and no context at all about your business outside of what you could learn from the internet, right? And so where I think most failures tend to happen when you try to do really meaningful work, right? One, just pick it up off the ground, like giving the tools to the right people, or to people to enhance their personal productivity is actually harder to do than it sounds, to get people to use it right, train it right, do it right. We touched some of those things, but that's pretty straightforward stuff. But when you try to get it to do like really meaningful work in your business, you've got to, realize you have this incredible intelligence capability, but you can't apply the intelligence until you've provided it with the right information. And which you hear this context engineering buzzword around, but it's a buzzword for a reason. Until you really understand, until you can give this super intelligence the right understanding of your business, put things into perspective, help it understand the way, your terminology. What do you mean by, churn? That's actually lots of different companies define that in a different way. Where is that data stored? There's a lot of information. If you just plucked, someone randomly off of the Stanford campus, right? There's an enormous amount of information you'd have to provide that person in order for them to just do a task immediately in your organization. And that's where people, and that's hard work.
Sure.
It'd be a hard work to pull the Stanford grad off and get them up to speed, and it's hard work to get this LLM.
Exactly.
There's this powers of 10 thing.
Well said.
There's a powers of 10 thing going on here, which is if I do back of the envelope math on the use cases that we've encountered, I think AI tokens are worth about 1,000 times what you pay for them. Right. So it's 10 with 3 zeros. That's roughly the value they have. Right. And I can back up that statement with, lots of different examples. And so if it's 1,000 to 1, you probably better look at whether or not your business can get that goodness. Right. That's just motivation to get unstuck. So then the next step is, all right, what kind of problem? And Jim, you've got a whole playbook on what kind of problem. But I love something that the Manus guys put out, which is a great benchmark we've started applying. And that's roughly that for every 100 things you tell an LLM, it's going to do 1 unit of output work. And so what does that mean? Well, if you have a 100-page manual for how to do a job, an LLM is going to apply the one correct page to that job when it's time to do it, right? It's 100 to 1. And you don't want it to do something the way it learned on the internet that you ought to do that, right? You want to give it the 100 pages for your business and have it choose the one right page to do it, right? So 1,000 to 1, 100 to 1. And then the last point is, at least what I see, working with a few different job categories internally for us and with customers, about 10 to 1 is the speed at which the machine can do something compared to a human once it's really ready to do that job, right? So if you just think of those powers of 10, I mean, you got to get off the dime, right? And then it's a whole separate challenge. Instead of saying no, it's how to say yes, right? That's the approach.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. All right, so maybe we can do a quick round the horn on the GPT-5 sort of impressions, and so how about me, Jim, Mike, and then Stu? Mine are, I'll be honest, I've on the one hand, I find it, it's very fast, much faster, I think, in many cases than some of the other models. I was using O3 a lot personally rather than 4.0. I have found it gets really bogged down for me in a couple of cases, either where like it's a very long conversation maybe, or I've also noticed a correlation if I use agent, everything else seems to slow down. And I don't know if I'm just because I'm burning too many GPUs, Mike, like you were just saying, probably maybe commanding, 100,000x, value. But I did notice a lot of people really missed 4.0 and sort of the friendlier emoji, laden, sort of thing, which I was very happy not to have that because I usually tell it not to do those things. So, Jim, how about you?
So on a personal level, I'm a fan of the models, the sort of upfront model selection that's going on. That said, you still got to sort of think about your prompt a lot because that's ultimately going to guide it where it's going to go. I'm excited to see that it's going to improve over time because they are capturing that sort of, and especially when the user community out there sort of says, no, that's not really what I wanted, go in another direction. So this is only going to get better with the usage. So big fan of that. A little disturbed by the fact that there wasn't upfront recognition that by sort of taking many of the models off the table, if you will, and going to 5, it was going to break workflows out there. And it broke people's personal agentic workflows that they had going, and it's breaking some company agentic workflows. And that shouldn't have been a surprise either to OpenAI or to the user community. And that's the kind of thing that unsettles the enterprise in terms of leaning into agents. So that was a little bit of that was a quirky one for me. And bluntly, I'm in this business and I didn't necessarily see that coming and think about it.
Let me throw one thing on top of that, which is there's this guy, I think Stu watches him as well, Nate Jones, I think is his name. Nate, does a bunch of videos, very, very, some great stuff if you haven't checked it out. And he was saying his observation, because I guess the system prompt was leaked, and he was sort of observing that it led him to believe that OpenAI was really heading down sort of an enterprise path. So to your point, Jim, if that's true, that what you just said becomes even more important for those guys.
Right. This is gonna the release timeline and the sort of preparation. The more agents that are out there, and sort of how much the dependency and how much they're hooked in to a particular model. It's if we think about the enterprise market, it's going to have this is going to have to get more mature how this gets rolled out and deployed, and there's going to have to be sort of adherence to sort of backwards functionality and not allowing for not breaking those the more agents we have deployed.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, from my perspective, it was a very exciting event, because the last time this happened, we went from 3 to 4. It was literally the difference between a toy and a car that you could drive around and do stuff with. Right? A toy and a tool maybe is a better answer. Yeah. So I was really excited, like what Uncle Sam was going to bring for Christmas. Sam Altman, the
Death Star.
the exactly the reality of it. Look, I will say the model is is at a higher level of intelligence. Like it is just flat smarter, and that comes through for me when I'm literally writing prompts and interacting with it. It comes through as what I would call awareness, and I know that's a weird word to use for a model. I don't mean it's self-aware. I mean it's just more contextually aware. If we're having a conversation and it's talking to me about what's happening, it's just more aware of common sense things, of real world things, of it's a little bit less short-term memory gaps and a little bit more just in the room with me. The reality though, as Jim's pointed out, is that it is disruptive, or has been disruptive, and fortunately that's something that that we would have caught. People using our tools would have caught, because we have that built-in ability to regress before you deploy. So it is unfortunate that others didn't have that, and that those problems have come about, because now we'll have to climb our way out of that hole from a PR perspective. But I'll say, last thing I'll say is it is smarter, but it wasn't the sort of toy to tool step.
I had higher expectations.
Yeah, it didn't go from tool to power tool the way that I'd hoped.
It might have been the Death Star rising over the horizon that gave you higher expectations. Maybe, I mean, that was sort of the hype that Uncle Sam put out there.
Exactly.
Stu, bring us home, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you really have to separate. I think with GPT-5, you really got to separate the experience you get inside of ChatGPT, just interfacing with the chat, versus the experience you get using it in through the API, or with some of these coding tools we were talking about earlier. So, I think if I'm trying to just retcon what was OpenAI trying to achieve with some of the stuff that they were doing with GPT-5, I think part of what they were trying to do, especially with ChatGPT, was make this a much more scalable thing for them, right? And try to simplify the user experience. So it went to automatic model switching, which means, when you type something into ChatGPT, you used to be able to choose exactly how, which model to do. Now it's kind of switching in the background. They're starting to add back some of that capability if you want it for power users. But in the normal experience, it's kind of picking what you do. And it might pick, it might pick a model that's kind of your, slightly dumb cousin, or it might pick one that's your, incredible Einstein level friend. But it's
should we start feeling insulted
there? Yeah, but I think what they're trying to do.
Cousin a lot. What does that say?
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, but I see what they're trying to do. I think the most expensive, the hardest part for this stuff now at scale is it takes a lot of GPUs to make these things run. So I think that to a certain way, versus trying to optimize for the experience we all get through ChatGPT, I think, versus them trying to optimize to give you the smartest, highest intelligent level experience possible, I think they were trying to optimize to giving you the smartest, and they might even fell down in some places in this, but trying to give you the smartest response possible per unit of GPU, right? But to control those GPUs down and try to get smart. So I think some of that gets reflected in that ChatGPT experience. I think as using it to do programming tasks in a setting where you have more controllability around the level of thinking and smartness that it's going to do, I found it different but good once you get used to it. And someone online said this, and it resonated with the experience I had. If you're using the Claude models for programming, which are also quite outstanding, it's like this really eager, ready to go. You ask it to do something and I'm going to go put 3,000 codes, 3,000 lines of code to write this thing out. And I'm going to get it as fast as I can. And I'm going to do this. And whereas I think ChatGPT 5 is a little more, I find it, it's more like the grizzled senior developer. You know what I mean? It wants to like it's going to develop a really smart approach for what you ask it to do. Now, if you ask it to do, if you're not clear enough in what you ask it to do, you might run into problems. But it's usually going to deploy a really smart way. It's going to be pretty tight in how it's approaching it, and it won't, you know, and it isn't going to tell you as much about everything that it did and everything. It's just going to kind of get the job done. And, you know, so that's why I've actually switched a little between those two models, but I actually find it has solved some really good problems that Claude struggled with. And I think on the front end side, if you're designing like UI interfaces, it has pretty good taste, if that makes sense, right? Like it designs pretty good interfaces
that I was talking about.
Yeah.
So awesome. All right. Well, we're gonna leave it there. It was awesome.
Yep. Cheers. Talk soon.
Thanks, fellas.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.